Professor Shankar Prasad Bhattacharya. Professor Bhattacharya is simultaneously a first-rate research worker, scientist, and an excellent teacher, a rare combination of the two. In Hooghly Mahashin College, Professor Bhattacharya needs an additional introduction. He is an ex-student of the department, and he is one of the most outstanding students ever produced by our department. After his post-graduation from Burdwan University, he started his PhD work under the guidance of the great physical chemist, Professor Mihir Choudhury. He is considered as one of the gems mentored by Professor Mihir Choudhury. He became associated with Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science as a lecturer in the Department of Physical Chemistry, retired as a senior professor, and now a visiting professor in the School of Chemical Sciences. In the year 2005, IACS started post-PhD integrated PhD program, and Professor Bhattacharya is an integral part of the very rich teaching faculty of IACS since its inception. Now, from the very beginning, Professor Bhattacharya chose a research career in theoretical chemistry. It was difficult in the early 80s with the scarcity of infrastructural facilities. But gradually, he created his own group consisting of a number of bright young students. His research in diverse and difficult areas have been widely acclaimed for their originality. Undoubtedly, he is a leading theoretical chemist in India. Professor Bhattacharya has published more than 200 articles in international journals, and he is author of 3 books and monographs. He is a fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore. He is also a fellow of West Bengal Academy of Sciences, associated with several decision-making bodies of the Department of Science and Technology. Professor Bhattacharya has received several honors and awards, and one of those awards is Gyan Chandra Ghosh Memorial Award of Indian Chemical Society. Now I'd like to tell a few words about the seminar itself. We know Professor Bhattacharya is a hardcore theoretical chemist, but I personally requested him to deliberate on a topic which is understandable to honors level students. And the subject matter which is selected is understanding properties of atoms, molecules, bonds, and materials on the basis of simple models. Chemistry is all about atoms, molecules, bonding, and structure. Now, finally, I want to say that any seminar or webinar, whatever you say, is incomplete without animated or lively interaction between the speaker and the participants. Now, the interactive session of this seminar will be moderated and conducted by Dr. Chandrashri Godhai Mojumdar. And with this introduction, I request Professor Shankar Bhattacharya, sir, please come and start your deliberation.
Be happy to be a part of this webinar. In fact, this is the first webinar that I am addressing. Normally, I tend to avoid all such meetings. Now, I was a student of Hooghly Mahashin College during 1966 to 69. After passing out from Hooghly Collegiate School just next door. And in spite of that turbulent time that we were passing through at that time, we had very pleasant memories of, I had personally very pleasant memories. I came in contact there with very outstanding teachers in mathematics, chemistry, as well as in physics. And in the Hooghly Collegiate School, particularly, my interest in science came only from him. I mean, many of you, I believe, know him, the outstanding mathematics teacher, Nimai Kundu. I still fondly remember his discourses during my stay there in the Hooghly Collegiate School. I have, of course, come in contact with very great teacher in Bardhaman University, one of whom is Professor Shishir Rocksit. Just fabulous, outstanding, and so inspiring. And of course, Professor Mihir Choudhury, my own mentor at the PhD level, was famous for his outstanding teaching abilities. Okay, but well, I fall far short of the standards, the exacting standards that they displayed, but nevertheless, I enjoy teaching very much. Now, about today's topic, well, I deliberately kept it somewhat open as well as vague. Okay, understanding molecules and materials and their properties actually. Is it inverted?
No, it's okay.
Okay. From models, okay? Now, that's interesting. If you consult a dictionary, you will see that by models, the lexicographers mean a very accurate miniaturization of a real object or a system. Well, but in science, models are not accurate miniaturization of an object, but based on the information available at a certain point of time, they are some artifacts, or not artifacts, I would say that the models represent certain constructs, theoretical constructs, which help us in understanding the properties of certain systems. Now, of course, the most famous model that, I mean, in this field is known to have is the planetary model of atom. Okay. The first model of atom came from Rutherford's experiment, as everybody knows, that it was a very small, massive nucleus containing all the positive charges, and outside there is mostly vacant space where electrons reside. Now, it was difficult to understand how such a system sustains itself, because classical physics would have told us that this electron, if it rotates like a planet around the nucleus, because of acceleration, it will tend to emit energy and gradually fall into the nucleus. But if, for example, hydrogen atom, everybody knows that it has an ionization potential equal to 13.6 eV measured at that time, so that it's a very, very stable system. So the question was that even at the basic level, in those days, 1913 or something, I mean around that time, whether we understand the simplest atom H as a stable entity from the classical concepts of electrodynamics, or simply the mechanics of such a system where the solar mass, heavy solar mass, has been replaced by the nuclear mass, but they are all positively charged, around which an electron moves. This was the planetary model that that gave us the first understanding into the working of a microscopic system like atoms. Okay, molecules are still far beyond that scope at that time. Now, question is, what was the information that was at hand at that time? The information that was at hand, one, I said that it is very stable, its ionization potential is 13.6 eV, but there was what is called the atomic spectral data, atomic spectra of hydrogen, and which consisted of series of well-defined, very sharp lines. Atomic spectra of hydrogen, which consisted of, very sharply defined lines, and there was, it was found from, it was found by several people. For example, there was Reed's combinatorial principle, as well as particularly at that time, Balmer, who found that these spectral lines, their frequencies, omega n, nm, or nu nm, was proportional to something like 1 by n square minus 1 by m square. Balmer lines had n equal to 2 and m equal to 3, 4, 5, etc., all these numbers, and it was proportional to this. So this information was there. The atom is stable, and the spectrum, the emission spectrum of the atom, consists of lines that indicate that there are differences in energies of 1 by n square minus 1 by m square like things. That is, integers that appear in the expression for the frequencies. And the constant, proportionality constant, was determined, was accurately known at that time, called Rydberg's constant. So question was, can these things be explained on the basis of, on the basis of classical physics? It was impossible, it is not stable, and where from these integers will appear as differences in this, in these expressions. Now, and there comes the planetary model of Niels Bohr. His idea was that the electrons are moving, or electrons are moving, no doubt, but these orbits are of special kinds. These orbits are, in his terminology, they are stationary orbits. Stationary orbits are characterized by the fact that the electron will remain stable there forever unless external agencies are applied on the system to throw out the electron. Now, he said that the dynamics of this system is just like planetary dynamics, except that the gravitational force is replaced by the forces between the oppositely charged nucleus and the electron. And that was, he said that this will be equal to E naught square by R square. That will be given by, that produces the centripetal force, m v square by R. Okay? So this is the basic thing. This is the basic forces into the system, the centripetal forces. Okay, E naught is nothing but the bare electronic charge divided by 4 pi epsilon naught being the permittivity of free space. And E0 square is E square by 4 pi E naught, so that we won't carry this repeatedly. Now, this is where the first interesting thing, if you read through the philosophical magazine paper, first paper of Niels Bohr, there he says that the dynamics is entirely determined by this equation, but I have to bring in a quantity which is unheard of in classical physics, h by 2 pi or h cross or Planck's constant, in order to define the proper scales of length and energy for such microscopic system which are not defined in classical macroscopic physics. So his idea was that since we have the charge and the mass of the electron defining the dynamics, we cannot using epsilon naught, E0, and the mass m, we are unable to define a length in this system. And he says that we have to bring in h cross to define the proper length and then save the atom from collapse. Okay? And that was, he said that let us combine hx, maybe E naught y, and mz in such a way, that means these exponents are chosen in such a way that I get the dimension of length. Okay? And that was simple. You know the dimension in terms of mass, length, and time of h cross. You know E0 you can define easily from the potential energy is E0 square by R. That is equal, that's the potential energy of the electron in the field of the nucleus. And this has a dimension, E0 square has a dimension of energy times length. You take the square root of that, so you know E0 also, you know m. Then you get three equations connecting x, y, z. On this side, you have m to the power 0 and L to the power 1 and what? Sorry, not 3. This is h cross x, m to the power z, and you have t to the power 0 here. So you will have, once you put in this, you will have equations involving x, y, z, three equations, and that immediately shows that you have a length scale defined, a naught equal to h cross square by m E0 square. Okay, that becomes the unit of length. And energy also, in this case, you won't have ln0t here, but m L square t minus 2. In that case, you get also an energy unit that is equal to m E0 to the power 4 by h cross square. Okay, so we argued that these are the length scales. That means distance here has to be measured in terms of A0. Whatever numerical factors comes here for the different states or the periodic orbits in his terminology would be in terms of A naught. And similarly, energy also will be epsilon 0. Sorry, you don't call it epsilon 0, but you call it E0. That will be defined in terms of these quantities. Okay. Now, so he says that I have to bring in h cross in order to define these two scales appropriate for the microscopic systems. And therefore, so you have therefore the situation that m v square by r, let us put a number n, this is equal to E0 square by Rn square, where Rn is a permitted or stationary orbit, whatever the Rn is, but we know that Rn will be expressed in terms of this quantity. Okay, so he then one. So in the dynamics elsewhere, you cannot bring h cross. So he says that mvr, the angular momentum, that is a multiple of nh cross, where h cross is nothing but h by 2 pi, the Planck's constant. So First, he uses H cross to define A0 and A0, and then he brings this H cross or the quantum component that is essential for defining the microscopic system here. MVR is equal to NH cross. Then it follows the dynamics can be immediately solved. MVRN, I would rather say, this is a stationary orbit permitted. And the values of N, he said that 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay. Then if you eliminate V from these equations, okay, V also should be Vn. If you eliminate Vn from this equation, then you get Rn. After just these two equations, eliminate Rn, so you get, eliminate Vn and you get Rn equal to n square A naught. With n equal to 1, 2, 3, so that the question of the electron collapsing into the nucleus does not arise. These are the only permitted radii, okay, according to his prescription. And rest is simple. You use this Rn in this expression, so you get expression for Vn. You form kinetic energy half mVn square, and plus the potential energy. Potential energy will be minus E0 square Rn. Rn is given by this expression, but from this expression you can immediately use the expression for Rn and find out Vn. Put it here. This becomes the expression for the permitted total energy of the system, and that turns out to be equal to m E04 by 2 n square h cross square minus. Okay? So h cross square. All right. So the question of 1 by n square appearing in the spectrum, atomic spectrum, that the spectral lines came as difference of 1 minus 1 by n square outside R, was clearly explained because values of n will be equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So when it emits from a higher value of m to a lower value of m, the lines are emitted, and Balmer line corresponding to n equal to 2 and m equal to 3, 4, 5, etc. The Rydberg constant as well as the frequencies of these lines were accurately determined. Okay. So, well, I am a little bit rushing through the deliberation of this course, but these are very simple things you can work out. But the point that I was trying to stress is that that H cross was not introduced just as such, but with the object of defining a proper length scale. Now, normally in textbooks we learn this much about this much about the planetary model of atom. But the question is that Bohr also dealt with this general case of the planetary motion of electrons around nucleus, and that was, as you know, as people knew from the Kepler's law of planetary motion, that the general solution of the dynamics is an ellipse with the massive body at the focus and a smaller mass orbiting around this. So in general, for stable orbits or stable states, the solution is likely to be an ellipse. And the question, of course, arose that whether this is amenable to the treatment that Bohr suggested. Now for the elliptical orbits, so circular orbits that we have already seen, Second was the elliptic orbits. That should be the general solution. And Bohr just argued that you have, for gravitation, you have again 1 by r square law, a central field potential. Here also you have 1 by r square law, 1 by r square law, also a central field potential. Therefore, the dynamics would be same. And the Kepler's law is equally applicable here, but with certain differences. So I'll try to focus on these aspects. Okay, so therefore he said that this energy of the system, as compared to the gravitational systems or the planetary motions, this should be equal to minus E0 squared by 2a, where a is the semi-major axis of the ellipse in which this motion takes place. All right, and immediately you can say that the a I can express in terms of E0 squared by 2 absolute value of a. A is a positive quantity, so I'm taking absolute value. So that's there. And then he said that the Kepler's second law that tells us that the time period of revolution, the time period of revolution squared is given by 4 pi square, in this case m, and then a cube. It's proportional to a cube. The constant turns out to be this by E naught squared. So that t will be equal to twice pi square root of m by E naught a to the power 3 by 2. Okay. This is a time of revolution in a stable orbit, and and therefore one can immediately see that the omega, that the frequency of revolution in the elliptic orbit, this should be given by twice pi by t. Okay, and that from this expression would be equal to E0. 2 pi will cancel out. You have square root of m a to the power 3 by 2, and that, using this expression, I can immediately write that this is equal to E0 by E0 by square root of m, and then I have 1 by a to the power 3 by 2, so it is E0 square E0 square 2 to the power 3 by 2, and this is also 3 by 2, and e to the power absolute value of e to the power 3 by 2. Okay, so that essentially gives us immediately, if you work out this one E0 square 3 by 2 will give you E0 cube, and this will cancel with this E0. So you have 2 root 2 by root m, okay, and from the denominator by e to the power 3 by 2, it will become equal to E0 cube. So there will be one E0 square, and then we have e raised to the power 3 by 2. Okay. So this is the expression for the frequency of the Kepler's elliptic orbit with a semi-major axis, which we have replaced by this expression. And then here comes his second, in addition to introducing the angular momentum postulate that they are given by mvr equal to nh cross, here he introduced the second concept, and that probably is his biggest contribution in the whole development of quantum mechanics, and that was the idea of correspondence. He said that, not at this point, but he said that, okay, this is h cross omega, that has to be an energy quantity. Omega is frequency, h cross is characteristic of microscopic system, so h cross omega. And he said that if I have a function fn, which is a function of some quantum number n, then this must give me the energy of a stationary orbit. So he made this postulate for the elliptic orbit, that h cross omega into fn, this is undetermined. This has to be determined from suitable conditions. So this should be equal to En. So h cross omega fn, this is omega, so that will be equal to h cross 2 root 2 by square root of m, 1 by E0 square, and then e to the power 3 by 2 into Fn, absolute value of e to the power 3 by 2 into Fn. This postulate was for the stationary orbits. Okay, since this is positive, I'll put a absolute sign here as well. En, so if I drop En, I will let it be simply e to the power 3 by 2. Okay, so this quantity, he said, that would be equal to E. Okay, so immediately you can see that E 3 by 2 would be equal to this, okay, not E 3 by 2. I divide both sides by E, so you get here E up, and this you get here 1, okay? From that, immediately you can show that this E is going to be equal to, I mean, after transposing and arranging the things, it's simply equal to m is, you find e square root and then square it, so it will become equal to m E0 4 by 2 root 2 by 2 root 2, that comes to 8. So m no, not m, 8 h cross square into 1 by fn square. Okay. So assuming that the Kepler orbital frequency omega multiplied by h cross and some unknown function of n gives me E, this becomes a formula for absolute E, and he said that stationary orbit should be therefore they will have the form n equal to minus a by h square of n, where a is the constant equal to m E0 4 by h cross square. Okay, so that is the formula of stationary elliptic orbits that Bohr's treatment gave rise to. Okay, now the question is,
the turn 8 is missing, the turn 8 in A. In A, finally was what you have written, 8 is there, some 8 in the denominator.
Huh?
Some 8 should be there, 8. Here.
That A contains that, h cross square.
8, R.
Because h cross, oh, here there was an h cross, that we have missed. That is h cross omega fn, that defined this. So the h cross was missing here, so that should be there. Okay, that's true. So that gives you this formula. All right?
No, sir.
8 R.
A equals to m is E0 4 by 8 h square হবে
8 একটা 8
8 থাকবে
8 8টা মিসিং 8
Oh no. কোথায় কি?
এইখানে a ইকুয়াল টু যা লিখেছেন নিচে একটা 8 দিতে হবে 8
same at the earlier expression where we are both.
No. I think that's okay. This 2 root 2 cube would have been equal to 8 h cross square.
Yeah.
So we have here 8.
Yeah. That's okay.
That's right. You are right. This 2 root 2 squared would have given this 8. So it is that. Okay, minus a by x square n. All right. Now, board idea was that suppose you consider two stationary states, stationary orbits, elliptic orbits of energy En and okay, this is En and this is En minus 1. That is adjacent periodic elliptic orbits. Then the frequency omega, h cross omega, is nothing but En minus 1. Okay, where the En is given by an expression like this. Okay. Now, if I use this expression, I mean, we are assuming that quantum numbers are large, En and En minus 1 are fairly distant orbital energies. So En minus, the En minus 1 I can try to expand, stellar expand around En, and that will give me using this expression, En minus twice a f prime n by f n cubed. Okay, I mean dropping other terms. So essentially this h cross omega would be equal to twice a f prime n by f cube n. All right. Now, there then comes the correspondence theorem that suppose that your n is very large, then his idea was that this h cross omega n, that is the circular, elliptic orbital frequency, the classical frequency multiplied by h cross will be exactly equal to this h cross omega. This h cross omega. Okay. Now, you have seen that your En is equal to minus what we had assumed that minus a by fn square. All right. And and omega, we had assumed that h cross omega fn is equal to En, so that h cross omega itself would be En by n, so that En should be minus, or may not, because h cross omega will be a positive quantity. We'll write fn cube here. Okay. So now compare this expression, h cross capital omega n is equal to, from that expression, a by fn cubed, okay? And h cross omega n, I may not call omega n, that means En minus 1 from this expression is twice a f prime n by f cube n. All right. So what does it tell us? If in the correspondence limit, that means when quantum number is very large, this classical quantity multiplied by h cross, okay, that has to become equal to h cross into omega, which is of quantum mechanical origin. They should merge. Then the only way is that you have to choose a proper Fn. An Fn that that makes these two expressions identical. Is not it? H cross omega n has to become h cross omega in the so-called, I mean, not so-called, what we call the correspondence limit. Okay. Then what happens? Then your Fn, first of all, has to be linear in n, so we can call it a constant times n. Okay, so that your f prime n becomes equal to, simply equal to c. So I can put here c, and not only that, that c quantity c has to be equal to 1, so that these two cancels out, and we have exactly the same expression. So in the correspondence limit, therefore, he had only one choice, that is Fn equal to n by 2. So the description is fine, but in the correspondence limit, Fn has to, I mean, that suggests that Fn must be equal to n by 2, so that the two expression h omega n passes over into h cross omega, and then you put that expression in En equal to minus a by 8 n square h cross square. Sorry, what was that? Fn square 8 h cross square into Fn. You put n by 2. Fn equal, this is Fn square. Then what you get? You get that same expression that we got m is E04 minus 2 n square h cross square. Okay. So that is minus. So essentially, therefore, even if the orbits are elliptic, that was the result. The energy expression does not change, whatever the eccentricity of the ellipse. That was his result. So you recover exactly the same Balmer spectral lines. That is those were the lines he was trying to fit, and that is the expression. Now, therefore, while for circular orbits he brought in only one condition, that was mvr is equal to nh cross, and this h cross he justified that we have to bring it because otherwise proper length and energy scales are not defined. And in the elliptic orbit, he brings in the very important idea of the correspondence relation, that in the limit of large quantum numbers, the classical mechanical description must merge into the quantum mechanical description, or quantum mechanical description merge into the classical description. I mean, the reverse way. Quantum description was new. That was the benchmark that in the correspondence limit, it must merge into it must produce the classical result. And so correspondence theorem is regarded as his best contribution to the growth of quantum mechanics. So, all right. Now, that is the planetary model nobody uses. We know now that, it was known after, it was 1913, 3 years later, Heisenberg, Schrodinger published 2 versions of, I would say, more exact description of reality in terms of quantum mechanics. And one was called the wave mechanics, that is Schrodinger's picture, and Schrodinger's wave equation, and the other was the matrix mechanics formulated by Heisenberg. So that, of course, in between, the Bohr-Sommerfeld quantization relations were developed, and Sommerfeld tried to push it to the maximum possible extent, and a lot of work was done, but those intervening period, the semi-classical period, I'm omitting, but then, so from planetary model of Bohr, model of Bohr, what emerged is the more exact quantum mechanical models, models of reality, and that was one was Schrodinger equation, which and two is Heisenberg matrix mechanics. I mean, this came to be known as wave mechanics. Heisenberg matrix mechanics. Okay. Now we're not going into that matrix mechanics, but I'm only mentioning them in connection with the fact that Bohr's model gave rise to many further developments. So models are important in science. Initially, they may be inaccurate. Gradually, they improve, and finally, they become a part of the reality. Now, planetary model of Bohr succeeded in explaining the line spectrum of hydrogen atom and hydrogenic atoms. That's fine. And the collapse of the electron into the nucleus was prevented by very clever introduction of the scale-up length A0. Since as you could see that Rn becomes equal to n square A0, and A0 has a fixed value, however small, there is no collapse. But that is not a very convincing argument. Now, one important consequence of these developments was that when we talk about classical physics, we assume that, as Bohr assumed, that there is a trajectory of the electron. But as these developments came through, it was found that it's not possible to define a trajectory. Not an orbit, not any trajectory, because there are certain observable quantities in quantum mechanics, in microscopic domain, which cannot be simultaneously defined with absolute precision. Okay, and one of the pairs is, for example, delta x and its conjugate momentum px, or y its conjugate momentum py, z again pz. Okay, and they were related by the relation that delta px, the uncertainty in px, and delta x, this is of the order of h, the Planck's constant, because this is the quantum of action, then is momentum times length. So it appeared that that's the limit. If you make infinitely precise positional measurement, this will become infinite. If you make an infinitely precise momentum measurement, the conjugate x would become uncertainty in that will become infinite from this expression. Actually, it should not. It should be, call it greater than. Greater than equal to h cross. That's h cross. Not h cross. Initially, this was h, and in terms of h only it was defined. Now, what does it have to say about the stability of the periodic orbits that either in the elliptical form or in the circular form was introduced by Bohr? See, now if you look at the circular orbit, suppose that electron tends to fall into the nucleus. Okay, suppose this is the radius r. So delta r is equal to r itself. Okay, and the conjugate momentum delta pr, the radial momentum, would be equal to, from that equality, it would be equal to h by delta r. So this will be equal to not h cross, h by R. Okay. So what is the consequences? It's the potential energy is minus E0 square by R. This is the potential energy. The kinetic energy is equal to P square by 2m. Okay. Now, this measures the uncertainty in momentum. Okay. This measures uncertainty in the position. The product is related by, we know that's why I have written it, this. But I want P square. This system has a symmetry, circular, so it is entirely central field potential, so it has a symmetry around this point. And that symmetry means that average value of P would be equal to 0. Now, P square average, okay, what is delta PR? Delta PR is simply the square root of PR square minus PR average square. Okay, that means square root of the flux means is square root of this fluctuation in the quantity PR. Okay, so that was delta PR. Now, if PR is 0 because of the symmetry, central field symmetry of the problem, then your delta PR square would be exactly equal to the PR square. Okay, so that we can assume that P square will be equal to delta P square by 2m, and therefore the total delta P square by 2m, and that means it will be equal to H cross square by 2m R square, so that your total energy for a falling electron, an electron falling into the nucleus, its energy as a function of R would be defined by it will be equal to H cross square by 2m R square minus E0 square by R. And you can immediately see that this expression, which arises because of the uncertainty in the momentum and position corresponding to R, must have a minimum, because if the electron tends to fall into the nucleus, the kinetic energy will go as 1 by R square, and potential energy will fall like minus E0 square by R. So electrostatic interaction will try to pull the electron onto the nucleus, but the kinetic energy term as it creates a kinetic energy pressure which tends to throw it apart. So there is a balance, and if you minimize this with respect to dE, dr equal to 0, and again you find that the optimum distance R0 becomes equal to that A0. That is the first radius of Bohr, which Bohr said that is the proper length scale for microscopic system. So essentially, the hydrogen atom is saved from collapse because uncertainty relations which were sort of defined and described in more accurate version of the quantum mechanics, not the old quantum mechanics of Bohr, shows that the atom has to be stable. It cannot, of course, it might be, you might say that if Z is very, very high, what will happen? But that we are not discussing. So again, that's what modeling is about. Now, maybe I'll not push the discussion further into quantum mechanics. let us consider some problem which is, so, okay, before I pass into the second problem of modeling, let me emphasize that the models gradually developed in course of time as more and more information were available, gradually culminated in the development of quantum mechanics. So modeling is something, however rudimentary, however inaccurate, should be encouraged among the students in particular, so that one should not be bothered by the dictionary definition, that it has to be an accurate miniaturization. It is simply a representation of the reality as far as practicable and possible. Now we come to completely different. This is a planetary model of atom that we have been discussing. The other model that has played its role in many areas of physics, chemistry, is the harmonic oscillator model. Okay. And everybody knows that harmonic oscillator is an oscillating particle M on object M of mass M, which is moving under a force equal to minus, in one dimension I'm assuming, minus kx. Okay. So the force is always directed towards some fixed point, let us say the equilibrium point in the oscillatory motion of the particle. And this force is easily derivable from a potential minus, okay, VR is equal to half kr square. So minus del V del R will give rise to this force minus kx. So this is called the force constant. And we always assume that a diatomic molecule is held together by a bond, which is like a spring, which is oscillating with a frequency frequency omega, which is found to be equal to root over of k by m. Okay. Now, of course, as you can see that this automatically, even in the microscopic domain, it automatically defines h cross omega equal to h cross root over of k by m. We'll have the dimension of energy, and therefore there is the energy scales in the microscopic domain is for an oscillator would be h cross omega. And but if you want to find a length, appropriate length in the scale, you can proceed along the same line that I indicated there. You will see that the length scale would be root over of h cross by m omega. Okay, that will be the length scale, which shows that if the frequency is high, the range, the oscillatory motion, the amplitude will be small. And if m is very high and omega is very high simultaneously, it will oscillate only slightly. So it shows that range of amplitude that is available to the particle with a certain mass and certain force constant. That's not the case. Now, the potential is, used everywhere in modeling, in every phenomena. If you put this potential V x equal to half kx square, then you see that at x equal to x equilibrium, which you can call the origin, it is symmetric about this origin. Okay. Now, in quantum mechanics, whenever there is such symmetry, the inversion symmetry, the states, the quantum states of the system are either odd or even. Are of odd symmetry or even symmetry, but we will not. But notice the symmetry of this potential. these two halves are exactly identical. Now, when we talk about a solid consisting of many atoms, okay, I'm considering just one line. There would be others, for example, connected in different, all of them on a lattice, they will be connected, but in between the atoms there is a space, the lattice constant and whatever you call it. Now the question is, such a metal expands on heating. Okay? Metal or a solid expands on heating. Now, how do we explain this? We always assume that this pair of atoms are moving in a harmonic potential, like this. So they are oscillating, describing a harmonic potential, in a harmonic potential. Now, will such a solid expand on heating? The idea is that, okay, the amplitude of vibration will increase when you heat it, and therefore it will expand. No, it cannot, because on this side from the equilibrium, if I measure distance from x minus x equilibrium, okay, so if x is larger, this is positive, so this is a positive side, expanding, and if x is smaller than x equilibrium, this is a negative side, that means this is contraction. And this is expansion, okay? Now, if I average over several periods, one period, or there would be no displacement because of the symmetry of the potential. The oscillator is as much likely to be in this space, that means in the positive or expansive part of the potential, as it will be on this. So what will happen? On average, there will be no displacement, and you will get average displacement would be a line like this. So on heating the solid, if I call it a harmonic solid, it will not expand. Okay. The expansion occurs because of asymmetry in the pair potential. If you make this asymmetric, that means like this and then going down in this way, then of course this side, positive part of this space, would be more accessible to the particle because it's a low energy part. This is a high energy part. So asymmetry in the pair potential is essential for describing the expansion of a solid on heating. Harmonic solid would not expand because if it is perfectly symmetric on both sides, these and these sides are equally accessible, and that average out to zero expansion. So, but of course, if you want to find out the expansion coefficient from the bond expansions, it is possible with a asymmetric potential, but that also modeling is also a hard job. We are not interested in that. But you know that there is from a pure metal, we are considering similar atoms occupying all these sites. Just from a pure metal, this is a pure substance. If you go to an alloy named Invar, okay, which has a composition, if I remember correctly, 0.64 nickel 0.36, okay. This alloy does not expand on heating over a substantial range of temperature. Why so? One possibility is that such an alloy is described by a symmetric potential. No, that's not the case. As you know that iron itself expands. So Fe bond, they expand on heating. That means they are described by an asymmetric potential. Nickel-nickel also has expansivity. So they also expand. So what happens that Fe Ni, that is invert, does not expand. Okay. Now to model, you can say that the expansivity of the alloy, we can describe in terms of bond. So what will be there? There will be, in some places, there will be Fe-Fe bond. Some places there will be nickel-nickel bonds, because if it is a random alloy, sites should be randomly occupied by Fe and Ne in that proportion, 0.64 is to 0.36. And there will be somewhere there will be Fe Ni bonds or Ni Fe bonds. Okay. So expansivity of the alloy can be written as, supposing the alloy is, I'm writing A for iron and B for nickel, so it is AX B1 minus X. Then the expansivity of the alloy described in terms of the bond expansivity will be X square, that's the probability that there is an AA bond, multiplied by, I can call it alpha AA, the expansivity of AA bond, and then 1 minus X whole square, probability that there is a Fe-Fe bond in the system, multiplied by alpha BB, where alpha BB is the bond expansivity of Ni, plus twice X into 1 minus X, alpha AB or BA. They will be symmetric. So this is the probability that there is a Fe-Ni bond or Ni-Fe bond. So this will be the expansivity if we want model. Now, if it so happens that Fe-Ni bond expansivity is just equal to average of alpha AA, okay, bond expansivity AB is equal to alpha AA plus alpha BB, then obviously, I mean, immediately you can see that the expansivity of the alloy would be simply equal to X times alpha AA plus 1 minus X times, as expected, alpha BB. All right. That means such an alloy would expand because alpha AA and alpha BB both are positive. So what happens in case of invert? It must be that for the Fe-Ni bond, there is actually a contraction. Okay. That means it is the other way around. It is steep here, goes down and then goes up again. There is a temperature range in which this part is accessible, where Fe-Ni bond is actually contracting, and that one can show that happens because of Fe-Ni magnetic interactions, and the alloy invert does not expand. Okay. So harmonic oscillator models are always good, but there are some places like the expansion of solid, well, you have to bring in anharmonicity, and of course that makes the model hard to execute in practice, but maybe. So again, starting from the description of atoms themselves and understanding what atoms are, why do they behave in that particular way, down to a solid, you can sort of hook up or construct different types of theoretical model of different complexities, but that gradually makes your understanding better and better. Maybe I think I'll stop here and address your questions.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Shobhak, that was your answer from sir. Shobhak belongs to 4th semester of Hooghly Mohsin College.
Yes.
Now I request for more questions from the audience.
Hmm?
Said okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Our question is how does
Okay, the next question is from Bhaskar Das. How does the composition play with the anharmonicity of the alloy? How decreasing or increasing the ratio of iron to nickel affect it?
Yes, as I said, as I showed that will be the expansivity of alloy in terms of bond expansivity will be defined by x square into alpha AA plus 1 minus x square into alpha BB plus 2 into 1 minus x into x alpha AB. Okay. Now, normally one expects alpha AB to be, that means the heteropolar bond, and harmonicity should be average of the average of the expansivity of the two. So potential, if they are of the same type, then this averaging will work out. But if the potentials are very different, as in the case of iron, nickel, they will be very, very different. And there the composition will define what is the final value of the observable, in this case the expansivity. That's the sum of three terms, x square alpha A plus 1 minus x whole square alpha BB plus 2 into 1 minus x into x alpha AB. All right. Now, obviously, if you vary, the expansivity will vary. Expansivity itself will depend upon the potential energy. Okay. If all these details are known, then you can work out and predict how the composition will affect the Okay, now anharmonicity, if it is anharmonicity, then that are described by the basic interactions. Okay, so that one has to work out. Yeah.
Piyutosh আবার
Yes,
ছোট্ট প্রশ্ন আছে এটা ওই কোয়ান্টাম মেকানিক্সের কোনো টেক্সট বইয়ে কোনোদিন পাইনি, দেখিনি, কিন্তু বলছি, কিন্তু অন্যরকম বইয়ে, ফর এক্সাম্পল সেন্টিনারি ভলিউম অন নিলস বোর, এরকম একটা বই, সেখানে কমপ্লিমেন্টারিটি প্রিন্সিপল বলে একটা প্রিন্সিপলের কথা বলা হচ্ছে, যেটা এটাও বলা হচ্ছে বোরের নাকি একটা ড্রিম ছিল যে হি উইল রাইট এ বুক অন দ্যাট প্রিন্সিপল. It was proposed by Bohr himself. Complementarity principle. In brief, basically tells that unlike the classical, when two mutually exclusive concepts like particle and wave, if they are mutually exclusive, then one must be wrong, one must be correct. But the quantum suggestion is that no, you have to take both the picture to describe the system completely, and that Bohr called actually complementarity principle. So, yes. Can you suggest any reference, or you can give some idea about that principle, please? Complementarity principle.
Maybe Max Jammer.
Yeah, Max Jammer. He was the writer, I think, that article.
Yes.
But I think it's more of philosophy than of physics, maybe. But he wanted to write a book on that, but he could not.
Yes.
He could not.
Yes. I mean, some people consider complementarity principle and correspondence principle being the highest contribution of Niels Bohr to quantum mechanics. But nowadays, I mean, nobody much discusses about complementarity principle.
Right.
But
Okay, sir, we will take two more questions actually.
Essentially, I mean, this lecture was about, creating interest in model building. Okay. Now, as you learn many things, it's not simply solving certain numerical problems or learning whatever things are taught. It is absolutely necessary to step a little out of the peripheries of the syllabus and whatever you have to learn because of examinations. And there, these models on small projects can play a very, very important part in sort of creating interest, excitement, and joy. Obviously, learning whatever is there in syllabus, what is being taught, are very, very important because it is related to your career. But, I mean, science is a pursuit of creativity. And that
একটু ডান দিকে ঘুরে বলুন না, মানে ক্যামেরাটাকে বোধহয় আপনি ফেস করছেন না। Yes, ডান দিকে, হ্যাঁ, না, yeah. We want to see the whole face. Thank you.
Okay. So what I was trying to emphasize, is that the joy of learning can be sort of by pursuing small modeling problems. Maybe they are theoretical, maybe experimental, maybe mixed, at all stages of the education. And that is somehow missing in our system because of a variety of reasons. So I would urge upon the students that learn what you are taught, learn what is there in the syllabus, but step a little outside and try to probe certain problems that may come to your mind that have been posed elsewhere, and try to build up model. I mean, to whatever extent is possible. I mean, that is why I specially mentioned this bond expansivity to expansivity of a material problem. It is hard to finally come to a value of the material expansivity from the bond expansivity, but it will be very, very useful experience for any student who try to execute similar models and understand the thing better. I think, I mean, that's what I had to tell you. Keep your mind open. Do not at all bother, I mean, whether it is immediately relevant to my learning. Any knowledge is relevant to further knowledge. So learn everything as much as possible. 3 years of BSc, 2 years of MSc. This is the time to learn everything. And to make the learning more enjoyable, you try to do some simple modeling. I mean, modeling, I don't mean that you have to build an instrument. Try to understand certain questions and try to formulate its answer in terms of, I mean, whatever you have learned. That will enhance your enjoyment of learning. Thank you. My voice